Monica, thank you so much. That was a real tour de force and gives us a lot of things to think and talk about. I'll take the moderator's prerogative to ask the first question and give all of you an opportunity to think through your questions. When you have your questions, raise your hand, catch my eye, and I promise to get to everyone, or at least as many of you as possible. Usually we get everyone in the order that I see you. I'll just ask that you please actually ask a question, and that you do so briefly, because if it's too long, then it's not going to resonate on Facebook.
He was listening.
I was, and it gives me hope, because this video that these ISIS fanboys put on Telegram was 25 minutes long. So maybe no one paid a whole lot of attention to it, which would be great. But I did, and one of the things that they said was, and I quote, "You announce daily that you suspended many of our accounts, and to that we say is that all you can do, you're not in our league." And then they talk about Twitter too, of course, but they claim on the Facebook side that they have hacked 10,000 Facebook accounts. When I started in government in the 1990s at the FBI, long before social media, just with the beginning of the internet, we were struggling with the whack-a-mole conundrum. We'd find a web page and we'd shut it down, and it would pop up in a whole bunch of other places. Recognizing that you said that content removal is not going to solve this problem, and of course you're right, and all the other things you're doing are fantastic. On this aspect, what is done, what can be done? You find a web page that is a real problem, it's been warned, it's taken down. What do we do to make sure that they're not opening up someplace else, or for that matter, and again, this is just their claim, that doesn't mean it's true, and their ability to hack other people's Facebook accounts?
I hope I can address all that. Remind me if there's anything I don't address in that question, because I want to make sure I hit it all. First of all, we don't just suspend accounts. If we become aware of a credible threat, or think that it's appropriate to refer information to law enforcement to prevent harm, we do that. That's consistent with our terms and applicable laws, and we will forward information to law enforcement. That's something we do. We also have a robust process in place for responding to requests from law enforcement. If they're asking us for information and they provide the appropriate court order, this is where you can think about an FBI search warrant or something of that nature. We have a legal team that scrutinizes that, but then we will provide that information. So we don't just stop with content removal. In terms of account hacking, I'm thankful that's not my job, because I don't understand a lot of the technical side of things. But we have a security team that I think is second to none in terms of protecting our data. When you're running a service this big, where we have 1.6 billion people, we have to be so focused on making sure that the information that those people share is being protected, and that's something we take extremely seriously. There was something else you asked. There were three things I wanted to respond to. I'm trying to remember what the final one was. Well, the whack-a-mole thing. Okay. So, thank you to whoever said that out in the whoever said that in the audience. It is true that people, not just in the support of terrorism space, but in other policy violations as well, people, if you shut them down, people will try to come back. It is easy to create a Facebook account, a Twitter account, a YouTube account. That's by design. We want people to use these services, and we don't want to put a whole lot of barriers in their way. That also means you get the bad with the good. When you take somebody down for having a troll account or a spam account, you have to expect they're going to try to come back. We do have measures in place to try to prevent that. It doesn't mean it's perfect. And that's why, actually, sometimes people will say, well, how many accounts do you actually remove for this policy violation or that violation? And one of the reasons that's not, I don't find that particularly useful for myself to track, is a lot of these are duplicates. So this is a process that people are going to try to come back. What you have to do is just get really good at finding them again and taking them down.
Excellent. Please, right here. If you could just wait for the microphone to come, and let's hear from Europol.
Good evening. Pat Byrne, I'm the Europol Senior Representative in the United States. On that very point, and I'll try and keep it short and make it a question, we set up the EU Internet Forum with EU Commission,
Yes.
Europol, and the European Counter-Terrorism Centre on the 3rd of December last. We're looking at mechanisms working across all the public sectors and the private sectors to identify harmful content on the internet. What we don't want to do, in our position, is just to stop ISIS, because there could be another ISIS down the road. What is Facebook doing to develop that coordination, that structural, robust procedure that we can work together in public and private sector to combat that in the future? Not just this threat, but for all future threats.
One of the things that you mentioned was cooperation. I think that's key. And I'll start by addressing the cooperation that we have going in the industry right now. We started about, I guess, 2 years ago now, an industry closed-door roundtable on countering terrorism and violent extremism. And the deal is basically this: we don't share the member companies that come to the roundtable, and it's just us. But it's a place where we can, without being judged by the media, or and nothing against the media, but without being judged by external sources, we can actually come together and just be very open with one another about what we're seeing and how we're trying to tackle these challenges. Of course, I can't share the platforms that come to those meetings, but I have to say that I have found it very encouraging, because what I see is a will among not only the large services, but also the small services to do the right thing to remove this content. Now, there's a difference between having the will to do it and having the resources in place and the understanding of the issues and the capacity. And that's the sort of thing that we best tackle through cooperation. We are far from perfect in enforcement of our policies. I'll be the first to say that. But at the same time, we have the advantage of having been doing this for a number of years, and having those speakers in 40-plus languages, and having offices around the world where we talk to people out in the community. That's something that we can share with some of the developing services, and we're doing that. So that's part of the answer, I think. You rightly point out that this is not just about ISIS. It's not just about ISIS. And it's not just about, people can define terrorism in different ways, and we're very clear that for us it's about dangerous organizations, and then we also have policies against hate speech. The two often go hand in hand. So anything that we are doing in our community standards is enforced globally. That is also, from what I've seen, the approach with a lot of other services. And then the third component is, how do you have a public-private partnership? I've personally been involved in our working groups with Interpol and with the EU. It's, I think, been a very productive dialogue, and part of it is education. We learn from Interpol, and we learn from the EU how trends are developing there, and we take that to heart, and that becomes a part of how we think about our policies and our enforcement. And then we're also able to share with policymakers and law enforcement sort of how things work on Facebook. Here's what we're doing. If you see this, let us know. And here's also the mechanism you need to go through if there's data that you want to request during an investigation. So I think it's working, but I think it's going to be a process and a continuing dialogue.
And clearly government's paying attention, because now we have this week what they've described as the Madison Valleywood project, right? They're Madison Avenue, the Valley, Silicon Valley, and Hollywood. So they're recognizing from their perspective the utility of this kind of public-private cooperation. Go here in the white shirt, and then I have here, and I saw someone here too. Okay.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Nawar Shora with Homeland Security. You hinted to this, and I'd like to ask you more about it. The one-on-one, I mean, it's great you're doing CVE. I love the inclusive play part. I know Tony Scrow and Adventure very well, but what are you doing on the one-on-one more? How can you empower people who are trying to reach the people who've crossed a certain threshold where they're now solitary? They're not looking out for somebody to play soccer with them. They're looking for things to justify what's in their gut, that, oh, yes, I should go to Raqqa. I should be going out to fight, for my religion, for my God, whatever. How are you, and this is a tough one because there's no real answer, I think. How are you trying to empower the people who are countering those people one-on-one?
We are, we talk to some organizations who are focused precisely on that. One of them is ISD, Institute for Strategic Dialogue. There are others as well. And when we provide information about what is succeeding to reach audiences, part of what we're trying to do is break that down to show what's succeeding with different audiences. I'll be candid and say we're still learning. I mean, this is, in fact, our second wave of research with Demos isn't even done yet. But as we get those answers, we're sharing them with those groups.
Over here in the back, please.
Hello, Scott Matthews with Department of Homeland Security also. My question is more about what you've discussed and perhaps not discussed this afternoon. And it seems that you focus more on the public area of Facebook rather than what's behind the privacy settings of individuals or what they might take place in Messenger, for example. So do you have I don't know if that's correct, but do you have a different approach to dealing with these types of issues when they're behind somebody's privacy settings rather than in the public?
What we do is when we become aware of an account that is supporting terrorism, we not only remove that account, but we fan out and look at the associated content and the associated accounts to make sure that we're getting it all. I talked earlier about how we talk to experts in this field, and one thing that we've heard time and time again is that if you want to find the whether it's hate speech or terrorism, but if you want to find people who are terrorists, the best way to find them is to find their friends. And so as we remove an account, that is how we would become aware of content that might not have been reported to us.
Right up here in the front. If you could just wait for the microphone.
I'm Muna Alami. I'm a non-resident fellow with the Atlantic Council. You were talking about different shapes of counter-extremist speech depending on the region and of the people who were delivering that speech. What is the profile of these people in the Middle East? That's my first question. My second question is that another problem we're having in the Middle East is autocratic regimes. And a lot of these regimes are using Facebook and Twitter to crack down on activism. And we've seen that in Lebanon as well as in Egypt and in Jordan. So how do you differentiate between the reporting against terrorist organization and against these activists that might be labeled by these regimes as terrorists?
With respect to the first question, I wish I had a more defined answer for you there. We are seeing differences, not only in terms of the demographics of the people who are interacting with content, but also, you know, those 6 categories I had up on the screen? Those have looked different for each country that we have that we have finished so far with demos. But I can't speak specifically to how they look. Here's the good news. I think that research is going to be done in a month or so, and then there will be a process where demos will be writing it up, and then they will publish it. So I think we'll probably be publishing it in the next few months. With regard to the security of activists, this is something, again, that transcends the terrorism space. We have long been mindful of this, not just on my team, but also on that security team I mentioned earlier that works on protecting accounts. There's a lot of work that goes on at Facebook to ensure that accounts are not being, activist accounts are not being hacked into. Also that if we are getting requests from governments for people's data, there's a very rigorous process for scrutinizing those requests and ensuring that they've gone through the proper process, which often means going through the mutual legal assistance treaty process. I'm going to spare everybody. I know you and I have been down this road, but that often requires something called dual criminality, where crimes have to be recognized under the treaties of both countries. So there are a lot of safeguards in place to make sure that people's accounts and their data are secure.
I'm going to jump to Olivier over here, and then we're going to come to this gentleman right here. No, you're good. They asked your question. Hey, guys.
Thank you very much for this very insightful presentation. I'm Olivier de Cotigny, a diplomat in residence here with the Washington Institute. There is no agreed international definition of terrorism, and your corporation is a global corporation. You have to deal with very different situations in very different countries. What do you refer to when you identify an organization as terrorist? International listings, UN Security Council designations, US, EU designations? And if not, is there a Facebook definition of terrorism? And is there a Facebook list of terrorist organizations?
What we have is a definitional approach. And what this means is we're looking to see, like I said, we're interested in dangerous or violent organizations. So we're looking to see, has a group proclaimed a violent mission, or have they engaged in acts of violence against people or against property where a person is likely to be harmed? It is a pretty broad definition. One of the reasons that we have that is because we're not a country. We are just a service where people come to communicate, and so there isn't. We don't have allies or enemies. And what we are is just a service where we don't want there to be violence. So it's a pretty broad definition, but we will remove any group that fits that.
On over here, all the way on the side.
Mehreen Farouk from WORD, the World Organization for Resource Development and Education. I wanted to thank you for your really informative presentation. Reuters, of course, came out, I think, yesterday with a great article that was highlighting a lot of the effective initiatives that have been launched by P2P and a few others, including our own. We launched our own first anti-ISIS video this past week. So my question is with this overall recognition that, both the government and the private sector need to move more towards encouraging more non-governmental organizations and individuals to create more content, what else can Facebook do to help empower local organizations? So I think P2P is a great initiative at encouraging individuals or students at campuses, but what can we do to get more organizations involved? Just to give you our own personal perspective, it took several months for us just to produce that 1 3-minute video, especially because we have limited in-house capabilities. So maybe if you could talk a little bit more about that, about your strategy moving forward to empowering more organizations, and in particular, if you have a strategy about working more with religious leaders or anything in that direction.
And congratulations on putting the video out. I know that's not easy. We've worked with some groups who are doing that, and I know it is a big effort.
It's a good video. I've shared it.
I hope you've shared it on Facebook.
I did.
Okay. Just checking.
I forget what's the name of the video? ISIS, a parallel religion, ? Put up by WORD, WORDE. How's that for a plug?
How do we get more groups participating in this? I said earlier that we know that the vast majority of people are against these ideologies, so why are more people not creating this content? This is an area, to your point earlier, this is a great area for public-private collaboration. We don't necessarily want, we meaning society, not Facebook, we don't necessarily want government to be the speaker, but government can play a great role in getting organizations to come together and talk about this. In the past year, I think it was last February, was the White House Countering Violent Extremism Summit. Since that summit, there have been a number of regional summits that have brought a lot of organizations to the table. We've participated in each of those. And so when we tallied it up at the end in December, we realized that we had actually done training for hundreds of civil society organizations around the world. So that's one thing that I hope will continue to go on. As we're partnering with EdVentures and Affinis Global, one of the conversations that we're having with them is how do we make these efforts bigger and how do we get them into more countries? So with EdVentures, it was 45 schools last semester. This semester, it's more than 50. Next semester, I think we're going to have even more, so we're trying to grow those efforts. But there is one third component, which is we want to make things easier for people to just go online on Facebook and find an easy way to do this. Part of that is improving our insights tools. Right now, if you run a page on Facebook, I don't know if anybody in here does, but I can tell you, again, I'm not a tech expert, it's not hard. You set up a page, you have an insights tab, you click on it, and it shows you here's exactly who is the demographic of the people who are interacting with your content. So the more that we can make that very easy for people, I think the more content creation we'll see.
All the way on the edge, please, Alan.
Thank you. I'm Ellen Nakashima with the Washington Post. It's nice to see you
Nice to
again,
see you.
Monica. Yes, this is a follow-up to your answer to the interesting question about what you do, how you handle private messages. When you find a private message that seems to be a sympathizer of ISIS or someone who's supporting them, do you immediately also report that to the FBI or the authorities? Do you take down that account, report it to the authorities, and then, as you said, you fan out? Would you then also identify other accounts that person is in contact with, immediately remove those as well, and report them? To what extent do you do the reporting on that?
The specific action that we'll take on any piece of content really is determined by what's in it. There certainly could be a situation where if we became aware of one message, but that message indicated some sort of threat, we would send that to our legal team. They would look at it and they would make the decision about whether or not it is appropriate for referral to law enforcement. As far as whether we would remove the account, we remove accounts where they are clearly representing an organization or a member of a terror organization, or where they're, if they've made individual posts that violate, where they've met a certain threshold in violations. And so whether or not we're becoming aware of we might become, let me, I guess, kind of take a step back and explain it this way. We may become aware of an account through several different means. It could be somebody reporting it to us through the site. It could be from somebody like yourself or one of the experts that we talk to regularly. They may pick up the phone and call us and say, have you seen this? So however we become aware of an account, if it breaks those rules, we'll remove it and we'll fan out.
Okay. And just one quick follow-up. There is legislation, I think, pending on the Hill that would require you to report such content immediately to law enforcement. Do you support that? Do you think that that would be effective and useful?
Before commenting on any specific legislation, I would have to see it. I'll just say that we have a very transparent process in terms of how we work with law enforcement. It's available. You can read it on our site in our data use policy, and we also publish every 6 months. We publish something called our government request report, where we detail how we've responded to law enforcement requests. So I think we have a good process in place, and I think it's working well.
Right here on the left, please. This gentleman with the beard.
Hi, my name is Adam Yeffet. I'm a master's candidate at the Elliott School at George Washington University. I was wondering how you deal with prominent social figures who might be engaged in hate speech or other forms of speech that are in violations of the policy, especially if they have certified accounts, such as celebrities or political figures or presidential candidates. Thank you.
So the policies apply to everybody. There are some, and you'll see this in our community standards, there are some areas where there are protections that actually apply to private individuals that don't apply to public figures. But when it comes to the application of policies, when people have written something, it doesn't matter what their stature is. We'll remove it.
Yes, right here in the back.
Thank you. I'm Leon Weintraub, Foreign Service retired. I wonder if you have a forum where you interact regularly with NGOs that encourage civil society, encourage free speech, that might get people into trouble with other governments. I'm thinking about the National Endowment for Democracy, Human Rights Watch, Freedom House. Do you have a forum where you exchange ideas on how to avoid activity perhaps that might get innocent people into trouble with certain governments?
What I can say is that we do engage broadly with civil society groups from all different sectors. So that does include groups that are very focused on human rights and on free expression.
We've had a series of questions about asking about working with foreign partners. But I wonder, before I call the next person, if I can ask you, do you see differences in how bad actors, terrorist supporters, haters gonna hate, act in different locations or in different languages? Or do you see that, human beings who want to do nasty stuff are generally doing nasty stuff in similar ways wherever they are or in whatever language they choose to do it?
Of course, I'm not the person who's the closest to the ground on reviewing our reports. I haven't necessarily heard of country-specific or even region-specific behaviors in that regard. But I will tell you that when a world event happens, we know, and it could be an unexpected event, it could be an attack of some sort, or some sort of natural disaster, or it could be an expected event like an election or the anniversary of a date that has some historical significance in that country. We know when something like that happens that we will have a spike in, let's call it controversial content, because actually what we've seen is a lot of it doesn't violate our policies, but we will see a spike in controversial content on the site, and we will usually see a spike in reports from that region. So, for instance, in the wake of a terror attack, we know that we will see increased engagement. Some of that is people just raising awareness and trying to say, hey, everybody should be paying attention to what's going on. Some of it will be people expressing opinions, people getting offended, people violating policies. So we do see that.
Excellent. Aaron.
As somebody that follows this content all the time online, I had a question related to how Facebook was able to be so successful in not allowing official distribution of the content from groups like ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and their branches from having a home on Facebook. Because even though there are, supporters, activists, and potentially members, Facebook's not used as an official distribution node for these groups, whereas you still see it being used in that way for Twitter, for YouTube, and of course now Telegram. So I was wondering, why is Facebook so unique in that way?
This has been a learning process for us, and again, I won't say that we're perfect, but we are encouraged when we see or hear reports that we are not the place for groups like ISIS to go. That makes us feel, and that's something that we share with our teams internally and say, you should feel good about the work that you're doing. I think it has been, we've had the policies against terrorism that we've had in place for years, but the enforcement process has been, there's a learning curve. And that's something that we've now had the advantage of years of experience. And that's why when we're working with others in the industry, we're trying to share some of those learnings, because nobody wants this on their platforms.
Always good to share the warm and fuzzies with your staff when they do well. Right up here, please, in the corner. Thank you.
Dan Davis, DBD Associates. Couple of things I'm wondering. First is, what size staff do you have to vet complaints or reports of inappropriate content? And the next is, I believe that Facebook offers a couple of ways of encrypting data, let's say your email service with PGP keys, and also access via the Tor network. How does that work with the surveillance that you're doing?
Can you remind me of the first part of the question?
Okay, first part of the question was size of the staff.
Oh,
you
right,
have
okay.
vetting.
The size of the staff one is a hard one for me to answer. I don't think we give a number there. I can say that it's the way that we determine the size of the staff is looking at the overall number of reports we're receiving in what languages, and then trying to get a turnaround time that is within a couple of days and often much faster. So I know that's not a great answer. In terms of your second question about how we provide protection and encryption for people, again, I'm not the expert on that. We have a security team that's focused on that. But something that we're very mindful of is making sure that when we talk about security, we don't just mean removing hateful speech, but also securing the information that people are sharing. So we have taken steps to make sure that content is secure. When it comes to dealing with requests from governments, we want to make sure that's going through the front door, if you will, and that. And so we have a transparent process in place for handling that. But otherwise, we want to make sure that people are secure and that their data is secure.
When I'm trying to understand this whole world of social media, I go to my full-time professional consultant, my 16-year-old son, and he tries to help me think of, how to understand these things. When you think of how to understand these things and thinking what's next, what do you see as the big opportunities and the big challenges, especially in this space, as you move forward?
These are challenges that are actually not so much specific to terrorism as they are to policy enforcement generally. As our community continues to grow, we see a lot of growth in developing markets, and a lot of spaces where languages aren't the mainstream languages that our review teams would cover. You have languages that are spoken by a smaller number of people, and so staying on top of the language growth is very big. The other thing is that we're seeing an explosion in video, meaning if you think back even 5 years ago, it was much harder to share a video on your smartphone. Even on social media, it took a long time to upload. The whole thing was not very easy to use. That's changed. And the length, not only has the prevalence of video increased, but also the length of each individual video is increasing. Now translate that into what it takes to review that when you are working at Facebook. You have to your point about the staff, you have a team of people. They're reviewing videos that have been reported. What do you do when suddenly the average length of a video goes from 5 minutes to 20 minutes? There are tools out there that can make it easier for people to review videos. For instance, there's technology out there that will separate videos into segments so that you can see, well, everything looks fine here, but is there a point where the activity changes, and can I go just to that part and watch it? That could help, but then what about the audio? What if the video is totally fine, but there's somebody that is making a threatening speech? And so there's no easy answer for us on video, and it's something that we're going to be really mindful of as we grow.
And I wonder, are there privacy concerns or terms of service issues related to possibility of maintaining sites material that is removed for research or law enforcement use? In other words, and especially I imagine it's less controversial for government's use, but for example, people like Aaron Zellen who review this material and study from it, but I understand you want to take it down, but is there a way still to make this useful and available to people who are doing good work with it?
We are very careful about the way that we engage in any research, because our privacy terms are very explicit, and we want to make sure that we are always respecting them. One of the advantages of doing the research that we've been doing with Demos is that it allows us to look at demographics in a more aggregated way, so that we can ensure that everything that's being done is something that we're comfortable sharing publicly. Beyond that, it gets harder. When it comes to actually preserving, if we've deleted accounts or content, not only do we have our privacy terms to be mindful of, but we also have data deletion laws around the world that govern how long we will maintain content before it is hard deleted from our systems forever. So that research can be challenging.
All right. Please join me in thanking Monica for a fantastic presentation and a really, really forthright set of questions and answers. Thank you all for coming. This is an issue that we will all be continuing to look at for a long time, both professionally and if you use Facebook as I do, to look at your children and nieces and nephews on a daily basis. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Oh, we did that in unison. That was nice.